As a prepper, should we run up debt to get more supplies if we anticipate an SHTF situation, or should we get our finances together? Hey YouTube, this is City Prepping. If you're new to this channel, my name is Chris, and on this channel we discuss emergency preparedness, aka prepping. I recently did a video entitled, "Is Everything About to Collapse?" The video was an attempt to answer a subscriber's fears. What I tried to do is present a calm, rational, practical advice to some of the concerns that this particular subscriber voiced in a comment. And one of the things that I recommended in that video was to get your finances in line as a priority as a prepper. I think actually I listed as a top priority, at least one of the things that I usually advise when people really get serious about prepping. I referenced a book by Dave Ramsey, Financial Peace. I've talked about this often on the channel. And I think Financial Peace is a good starting point if you are not financially literate and you're not really sure where to go with your finances. But the point being is that there were some comments that people saw this as bad advice. We should be preparing for the end of the world, kind of an attitude of, hey, just let's go ahead and run up debt. If everything's about to crash, why not? And that's a debate I've often seen in the prepping community. Should we run up our debt if we anticipate something's coming? Or should we work now on getting our finances in line, doing practical things, paying off debt, saving up money? So really, the whole point of this video is answering the question, how should preppers view finances when they're looking to the future when it comes to the issue of prepping? Again, do you want to go into debt to buy preps, or do you want to get your finances together? And what we'll do in this video is we'll take a look at kind of both arguments. I'll give some of my own personal recommendations. I'll end with a personal story on the journey that I've had to go through, especially when it comes to debt, finances, and figuring out a path moving forward and how I was going to approach prepping, at least from a financial perspective. So before we jump in and I go through the two different kind of sides to this equation, I really see three possibilities. And each one of those determines what you're going to do with your money. Now, preppers typically will fall into the two categories that we talked about. Kind of an SHTF situation, an SHTF mindset into the world. There's something major that's about to happen. Usually there's some kind of feeling or visions, or I've heard a lot of things over the years. People have emailed me, comment, and I've seen some of the things that are really driving individuals' decisions as to why they prep. All that to say, I believe there's a lot of preppers in this community, and I'm by no means saying that this is wrong or I disagree, but let's just acknowledge that particular mindset. And again, there's this view that something bad is going to happen tomorrow, something major, and it's right around the corner. The second audience and the second group is, and I kind of lump two together, and I'm sorry for doing this, but I would view kind of two groups within the second group is individuals that see a slow collapse playing out, or just people that want to prep for everyday situations. And those two can kind of be interchangeable, and we'll talk about that a little more. I think when you look at both sides of these equations, from a slow collapse perspective, there's a lot of things that we can look at. Things like the Fed's, continuing to print currency. They're debasing our currency. They keep printing more and more money. Every situation, every answer seems to be, let's just print more money. Obviously, we're seeing a result. As a result, we're seeing inflation. There's things like climate change, a lot of issues that we're seeing in the news, fires around the world. Or we can just look at prepping from an everyday life perspective, that I want to get my life ready. If there's some event that causes financial calamity in my life, I want to make sure I'm ready. So again, I'm kind of lumping those two groups together. Ones that see a slow collapse, or people that just want to be prepared. I personally would view myself in this particular camp, of the two camps. There's a lot of concerns that I have about the future, and there's practical things that I want to do to make sure that my family, my finances are in line every day. And then there's a third group, which we're not going to really talk about, where the perspective, and I wouldn't consider these obviously preppers, and they're not going to be watching this video, but individuals that view really nothing major happening. Life is sunshine and rainbows. Hey, if that's your perspective, more power to you. I can't argue with you, but that's not the conclusion I came to. So in saying that, of those three camps, two primary camps that we talked about for preppers, which of the two camps would you consider to be right? Which one do you think is in the end going to be the one that would, have the correct assumptions, or the one that's going to play out in the end? depending on which of those two camps you fall into will really impact how you view your finances, whether you're an end of the world prepper or you're someone, again, kind of like myself, that's more of a slow collapse, just wants to prepare for everyday life. So let's talk about those two camps. And again, I by no means am saying one is right or wrong because I'm in one camp, but I'm just acknowledging we'll look at both sides. So for the first camp, the end of the world preppers. When I first got into prepping really serious years ago, I found myself kind of getting caught up in that attitude at the beginning. There was a lot of things I saw that concerned me, and I found myself kind of aggressively preparing, and it's easy to get caught up in the fear. But let me ask you this, can anyone really guarantee when an event or a major collapse is going to happen? For sure, there's signs that we can see in our economy and other things that are pointing out some pretty big challenges ahead. There's a lot of red lights that are flashing, I won't deny that. But the fact is that nobody can determine with certainty what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. So my question in that scenario is, why go into debt? Why go into deep debt if you really are not sure what may or may not happen? A lot of things, again, we see in the prepping community and things I've covered even on this channel. One thing is, the issue with the housing market. Is it going to crash this year? Last year when the events played out at the beginning in March of 2020, I thought the housing market for sure was going to crash. But lo and behold, I bought a house in my house that I live in currently. I bought it in March of last year, and it has gone up in nearly 39% in value just in the last 16, 17 months. It does not seem sustainable. Whenever you see these kind of parabolic moves, usually is before some kind of a crash. But all that to say, many people in this community still are anticipating a major crash. And I'm not saying that it cannot happen. There were signs that a lot of people were pointing to. August 1st, the eviction moratorium. That ended up being extended, I think, out to October. What we are seeing is that Wall Street is now beginning to buy up a lot of properties to create cash flow rentals. They see the advantages of having assets on hand that other people are paying down, and they're actually netting a net positive from that. So we're actually seeing outside influences that are continuing to prop up the market. But the stock market's going to crash soon. Again, for many of us that went through 2007, that was, a really defining time of our lives. It was very painful. And you can look at what the feds are doing right now. When 2007, 2008 hit, they started rolling out programs or approaches rather like quantitative easing. They are, at least when it happened, when the event started, when the pandemic started last year, in March of last year, one of the tools that they kind of pulled out of their toolbox was to start printing. The feds use this to keep the economy from just absolutely tanking. And what we saw was what was called a V-shaped recovery. We saw a sharp drop, and then it just jumped right back up. They're dropping interest rates. They haven't quite moved into negative interest rate territory. I know some places in Europe have. But all that to say, what we are seeing as a result is inflation, which is clearly a bad thing. So in summary, I'm showing you some of the issues that many of us are concerned about, but I'm also trying to balance it with the reality that there are forces, and again, I'm not an economist, so I don't know all the things that happen behind the scenes, but every time I think something's about to happen, it seems like either the feds jump in or, Wall Street. And so I cannot with any certainty determine what is going to happen. Obviously, I can see that our economy is not healthy. And this video is not going to go into a deep dive on that. That's, again, I've done a lot of videos talking about some of the challenges our economy faces. But all that to say, I am not optimistic about our financial future as a nation. But no one knows for certain what will happen, when it will happen. And I set all that up, these comments, because I have been in debt personally, and I regretted it. You probably heard the phrase, the debtor is a slave to the lender. If I were to know with 80 or 90% certainty that some major event is going to happen tomorrow, then yeah, I might strongly consider going out and doubling up or spending all my money or running up the credit card to buy as many preps as I thought would put me in a position to weather whatever's happening tomorrow. But I by no means am trying to compare that to events that we know happen, things like hurricanes. I mean, we can see those happening, but I would hope, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, that you as a responsible financial individual have an emergency fund set aside. But we'll talk about that in a second. So is this a likely scenario? The end of the world, SHTF is going to happen. And I've talked about this in a lot of videos. I view things through the lens of possible versus probable. Anything is possible, but how probable are these particular events that you may or may not be concerned about? If I knew there was a major asteroid that was going to impact our planet tomorrow, again, I might take a different approach. But I think in this community we can get caught up in the Chicken Little syndrome, that everything is the sky is falling, and I myself segueing into the second group is kind of the camp where I'm at. Everyday preppers or individuals that see a slow collapse potentially playing out over time, and I would consider myself in that camp. I personally, the more and more I study, the more and more I become concerned about the future. And without even going down that path, we could just step over and look at what you would consider everyday preppers. These are individuals that probably wouldn't even consider themselves preppers, but kind of technically are. These are individuals that realize, look, life happens. There are normal events that occur, job losses, medical issues. I think 50% of all bankruptcies in America are due to medical issues. Car accidents. You could be driving down the freeway, living your life, and in a moment something happens. A car accident. Someone swerves in front of you. There's an incident. You could die, or there could be, you could be hospitalized. Death in the family. These are all things that can happen on a daily basis. You could be diagnosed with a disease. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to, belabor the negative things that can happen, but things happen in life. And being prepared for those events, insurance, getting your finances in line, that should not be thrown out the window because you don't think something major has happened or going to happen. Now, the next group is when it comes to just things that can happen are major events that many of us saw. 9/11, 20 years ago, Katrina, I remember watching that play out, the housing crash of 2007, COVID and the ensuing lockdowns that occurred last year. These were some major events that really defined and changed our nation. So all that to say, my advice in this scenario is be smart, be prepared, and don't ruin your financial future on the what ifs or what could happen and getting caught up in fear. And I always try to encourage people to realize the difference between panicking and prepping. Panicking is not prepping. It's easy to get into panic mode, and I've known people that have done it. There was a prepper that I knew. I used to go to a prepper meetup. He's an older gentleman, and when Obama became president in 2008, he ran out and racked up, I think, like 20,000 plus in debt, bought up all this emergency supplies he could, and nothing really happened. And he had a lot of regret, having to pay off that credit card debt for years. And it's not a good idea. I can't really think of a situation where it's a good idea to go in debt. The only thing I could exclude for that principle is buying a home. I think there's a lot of value personally in buying a home. But in saying that, I can't really ever think of a time that I've encouraged someone or recommended somebody go into debt for really anything, especially for items you may or may not need. So what do I advise? And this kind of ties back to the comment that started this whole video, where in my previous video I'd recommended people get finances in line when they approach prepping. Again, I can't tell you the order. If you want to start with getting food, water, hey, if you want to start there, getting a month's supply, that may not be a bad idea versus really tackling debt and other things. But all that to say, if you're looking at prepping from the perspective of finances, which is the point of this video, I would always encourage people to start with an emergency fund. Again, I'm not trying to pitch Dave Ramsey. I mean, whoever works for you, then great. Again, I think Dave Ramsey is good for someone that's not financially literate, that's starting out, that just wants a blueprint they can follow, just plug in some kind of values and say, okay, if I do X, Y, and Z, what will I get? But his recommendations, get an emergency fund, pay down debt. Hey, set aside a budget for prepping. Whatever order you want to take, again, that's up to you. If you're only picking up a few cans, a few bottled waters, whatever it is, every pay period that you can, start down the path of slow but sure. And pick up a side hustle. If you don't have, a large budget to work with, that's what I did for years. And when I started this YouTube channel, which I now consider an integral business, it's something that I'm growing. I built a team around it. But when I started this, it was just me doing everything. But it was something that I was really passionate about and still am. And it was really a side hustle. There wasn't much money up front, but I knew if I invested in this channel, there would be an audience that would want to hear this information. So whatever it is for you, find something that you can build a side hustle. And the biggest and most important point, and I'll finish with this, is become financially literate. I cannot encourage this enough. And I've talked about this in other videos in the past. There's a book that, for me, changed my life. And again, if this is not for you, I know there's a lot of other books out there, but this is Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And I'll finish with this story, and I'll talk about some of these other books by Robert Kiyosaki. I've got a whole stack here. I'm not going to just show everyone, but I've got a lot. I ended up buying pretty much all of his books. And if it's, there's another author that appeals to you, whatever, just find something that you can learn from to become financially literate. And let me finish with this story. I remember in 2019, I was living in what I thought was my ultimate dream home. It was a large mansion. I had been working for years, and I decided, what, I deserve this. I've worked so hard, and I need this big, beautiful house. It had the vineyard. It had everything. And I read Financial Peace, and I was laying in bed. I remember reading this, and it was, I had an epiphany. It was one of those moments I could look back, and I realized the light bulb went off. And I realized that I was living in a major liability. I had a home that was just this huge time suck. It was it sucked my finances. It sucked all the way around. It was a beautiful home, but it just required so much of me. And I remember in that moment that, hey, the light bulb went off, and I began to understand the difference between liabilities and assets. And for me, once I understood that difference, it was a game changer. And I'm not joking. I ended up nearly, let me just put it this way. I ended up being in the hospital with chest pains. I don't know if I was going to have a heart attack, but the stress of the realization that I've been building my financial life incorrectly for so many years, it hit me, just hit me. And we ended up making some major decisions, selling the house, taking other actions, and it has put me just in these last 2 years on a radically different financial footing. It has set us up and has put us on a course that I never anticipated. But all that to say, I became financially literate. So in tying back to the beginning question, should preppers go into debt if there's some major event? That's up to you. I cannot tell you with any certainty what is coming next. I don't have any crystal ball, but I can guarantee you if you go into debt and nothing happens, you're only going to regret it. Learn to live within your finances, pay off your debt, and get your finances in order and become financially literate. So hopefully this encouraged someone. Again, this is maybe a question I'm answering that nobody's asking, but I know some comments or, and it's a debate I often hear within the community. What should you do if you anticipate, such and such is going to happen? And the years that I look back over my life, I wish I had become financially literate earlier on. I would be in a much different place where I am today. And I guarantee you, if you can do that and not go down a path of debt, it's very likely you will not have regrets. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, your comments. Please post those below. I always learn a lot from the community. And as always, please stay safe out there.